Okay, go ahead, Michael. Robert. Michael.
I've never been called Michael before. I have been called Richard by someone for over a year.
I've only had one coffee.
So we had this issue. It was confidential, but it's solved publicly, so it doesn't really matter. Um, this was effectively a race condition, but in a really weird way, I suppose. In that at some point, well, basically, what was happening was when you try and move repositories, it marks the repository as read only while it's in the process of moving it. Sorry, Ishel?
Yeah, I just wanted to say maybe you can introduce it by saying it's to do with the GitLab migration.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's to do with the GitLab migration. It's which I don't really know the background on that, I must be honest. But this one was kind of interesting, but it's quite a simple problem in theory. In that basically it sets it as read only when it's starting the move, and then it marks it as writable again once it's finished moving it. I'm presuming that's the general process. But it was hitting a problem where it's trying to lock a record that's been changed. So that's what this first error is here, where it's trying to lock a record to say like it's read only or well, that's what I thought it was. What it's actually trying to do is it's trying to get a lock on the record to mark it as writable again, but the record has already changed. But why do we care? And that's where this change came in, because we don't. And it's a bit of a weird thing. It kind of felt like the file was written in the way it was for neatness, rather than it being something that actually made sense, if that makes sense. So let's see if I can get the history of the file up. Get the other one. It's never a good sign when things start to go really slow. So Fran wrote this a while back, but the state of it, let's look at I feel like there should be a simpler way to just like look at the last version of a file. So yeah, there's two main methods. There was also some rather weird syntax going on here where he'd put underscores before the private method names, which feels very not Ruby-ish to me. So I removed those just on principle, but there's nothing functional about that. But yeah, so what the main issue with this is that there's a transaction here on this first method for setting the repository as read-only. And in this method, it makes sense because what it needs to do is to read the column first and then update it. So it needs to read a column, trust that the value is still the same, and then update it. So that needs a transaction. It needs a locking transaction to ensure that it doesn't actually introduce a race condition. But ironically, it was then used here on the second one, which doesn't need to do that read at all. It doesn't matter. You're just setting it back to be writable. So very ironically, that introduced a race condition because now it can't establish that transaction lock if the record has any changes on it. But we don't care about those changes. So effectively, all my merge request does, and it is a very nice and simple one. All this Zoom stuff's getting in the way. It just removes that lock. So yes, it's probably the least exciting merge request I've done in a while, but it should solve it. And yeah, it is because we just don't care. I tried asking around on Slack all these sorts of things, and no one could give me a reason why we would want a locking transaction around just updating a column from true to false. So yeah, it went away, and that's it, unfortunately. Any questions? Yep.
Well, if anyone else got any questions, I'll go last. Okay.
There's not a huge
So
amount to
I got
question,
two
really.
questions.
Yeah.
Actually, I got three questions. If you go back, can you go back to the original code before we change it? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
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 So okay, so we got with lock when we're doing the transfer, and then so if
Mm.
it actually errors, how does that lock get taken off?
So with lock removes the lock at the end of the block. It's kind of like doing a
Oh, okay,
transaction block
okay.
in active record. Yeah. Um, so it will always um,
If there's an
return
exception,
the lock
well,
afterwards, if that makes
after the
sense.
blocks
Yeah.
enter exit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to actually. I haven't used with lock personally before, and I was wondering if you have, what's it
Yeah.
actually locking?
So it locks the row on the database. It does it
Okay.
using some built-in Postgres thing. I have used it before in I don't know, something like 5, 6 years ago or something like that, quite a long time ago. But it's so underused because you shouldn't really need to do this very often. Because in fact, you could probably get rid of that thing and do it in a single database transaction. You could
Yeah.
probably just put a condition on the update.
Yeah.
And then, so it's so underused that there are only, I think, these two instances in the entire repository
Mm.
because using it introduces quite a lot of problems. So I feel like this code could just be improved further, to be honest. But um, I went with the option that didn't require me to get a database review.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Basically, because I figured it would just be the quicker way of doing it.
And moving repositories. I mean, other than the Gitaly team doing migrations, do customers, how would you migrate a repository? How would you execute this code if you were a customer, essentially?
I don't actually know because I've never done it. I don't. Well, no, actually, I have done it. I've moved it between namespaces, but I don't think that actually relocates it in any way. So I don't really know personally, and I've just sort of solved it based on the error. But I don't know if anyone else has actually gone through this step. I'm assuming it's just where you move it in
Like
the GitLab
move
interface.
repository storage, like
Yeah, I can provide some like
Hmm.
information about that. So this feature is available for admins of the instance. So that's why as a client, you probably won't face it at all, only on your like local JDK. And it's more like technical. So you have different like shards, like for where you can keep your projects. And it's like a process of moving from one shard to another one, which is also probably as a customer, unless you have your self-hosted instance, you won't face it.
okay, so maybe some self-managed administrators might be doing this, rarely, but possibly.
Yeah, it seems like something that will crop up if you're an admin. Like if you needed to replace a shard or something, or you're having problems, you could move stuff that way.
Yeah,
Basically, it feels like one of those bits of code that was written quite a long time ago and probably hasn't changed a huge amount because if it works, it does kind of
yeah,
work. Um, but it's yeah, it is a little bit odd. You don't often find a file like this now where there's only one person who's ever written it over the
yeah.
course of a few years.
Robert, can
Yeah.
you explain to me? I don't quite understand. So you put on the lock, so no changes
Hmm.
are being made. What is, and then the error is being thrown. I don't quite understand how this exception is occurring. Sorry, can you just go back and explain that again?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I know you've already done it, and I know that's annoying.
No, no, it's fine. It's basically what it's easier to look at it probably on here.
But when the lock was on originally, no changes are being made to any rows post that lock. So I don't understand. There's information we can throw away, but like there's been no update made anyway because the lock was
Yeah,
on.
so the problem with this one is that it can't actually establish the lock in the first place, if that makes sense.
Because there's an ongoing write to the database or something.
Yeah, so basically, when it's tried to establish the lock, it's where it gets a little bit weird because this is some Ruby magic or Rails magic, I would say, and that with lock kind of doesn't indicate that this is actually like an instance method on the model, like on whatever it is in that regard. So this is concern that's being mixed in somewhere. So when it's calling with lock, it's trying to do it on that row in that table, but it's still very Railsy, and it's effectively Rails that's throwing an exception because there's already been changes made to that record, but only in Rails, if that makes sense. Like they're not persisted in the database yet. So
Okay.
someone's like updated a field on the model. So what's the actual error here? Yeah, it's effectively here. So it's where it's failing to get the lock. So it says there's unpersisted changes on the model, and then you can't call lock on a record like that.
Okay,
because
that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's a bit weird because again, there's kind of no reason to do it this way. Like if you wanted to avoid a race condition here, you could just stick the condition for the update in the query, and then it's all on the database side. The problem here is that it's doing like a round trip in the first bit of code in this bit. So it's doing this read here, and I don't know why it's basically just got the read here. This is a fairly weirdly written class. I would just stuck it all in line. I don't feel the need to put separate methods for single lines, to be honest, but it is whatever. But yeah, basically because it's doing this read, then a write in Ruby, it introduces that problem where you can't guarantee the data. So they've done this lock, but you could just put the condition on the update and it would solve that problem. So it feels like it's kind of a problem that's been invented and then made worse by Rails being weird. Because
Yeah,
like,
because
yeah, sorry.
when you said database, sorry, Robert, when you said database lock, like, yeah, I mean, that's what used to be a commonly used process where you'd lock the row for writing. So yeah, people could still read from it with your process, and then you do your update. And but yeah, there's this layer on top which you're describing where Ruby or Rails is working out, hey, I've still got some Ruby code that needs to be actually sent to the database. Right? Is that that's what you're describing, right?
Yeah, that's basically it. So like, what's a good example? Oh God, my other screen's turned off. My face has gone dark. So the problem is like, say you got a record and it's got 3 fields on it or something. So say project just had a name or something, and you want to lock that and update a timestamp for some reason. But someone's just updated the name in that same call. So something has affected this record in this same call. Maybe it's updated a timestamp, maybe it's incremented something, but it hasn't yet called save to persist it to the database. So this isn't actually a database error. The database actually just doesn't care. Like it would do it anyway. It's a problem that Rails has, and it doesn't want to lock the record because it already knows about other changes that should be made to the record in that same call. But again, it's unlikely that anyone has ever run into this because no one uses this method. There's just kind of no need to do it. So I feel like it might be worth another refactor at some point, but that refactor probably involves writing a new database change.
Yeah, maybe it's worth
just,
adding a follow-up issue just to put in the backlog to take this out. Yeah.
Was it a security issue? Why was it confidential?
I think it's confidential just because you could.
I can answer that. It's confidential because
sure.
all the GitLab migration issues are confidential because they're in a confidential epic. That's the only reason. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought there was some. I was wondering how anyone.
There's no actual reason. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think you could. You can't really exploit it because it can only be triggered by admins in the first place. But in theory, if you are able to reproduce it, I guess you could break a lot of repository records. So maybe there's that. But yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. So I'm hoping that's fixed. But yeah, the locking of, I just recommend not locking database records. When you get to scale, it's not a good thing to do usually because there are so many things that could be trying to update it. And the problem with all of these is it's not like it, sometimes it will wait, but because, and like waiting for, half a second on a normal application for a database lock to be removed is fine. waiting for half a second on GitLab, which is often just only about able to render before timing out, suddenly causes lots of timeouts when it starts causing like a chain reaction where things all start getting processed a bit later. So yeah, there's a reason why it is extremely underused in our application. In fact, I'm just curious now.
Yeah, I think Robert, let's thank you. I think let's
Cool.
wrap this one up. Because we've got another email walkthrough going through. If we maybe need to go over 10 minutes, would everyone be okay with that?
But to be honest,
or we can move it to next week.
Yeah, my merge request is quite similar to the Robert problem because yeah, it's a couple of lines change, but a lot of to explain and to discuss. So maybe we can just move it to another session.
That's fine. Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Well, in that case, does anyone else have anything else to add to that discussion? We'll wrap it up. Wonderful. I think this is actually quite interesting. I didn't even know there was a with lock. I'm going to go and read that method.
It's one of those things where I haven't seen this in like 10 years. I just don't write code like that. So it's one of those things. I think it's where people come from maybe different backgrounds that they're like
their leading underscore is a bit of a giveaway. Yeah.
Yeah, that feels very like Java-y or something like that. And it's it does feel like that sort of concept that's come from another language and or another way of writing. And
I wonder how it got through review actually. Anyway, I'll stop the recording.